Hello my friends, welcome back to Player Display. I think this week we're going to take it a little bit easy. We're not going to do a full review, I hope you're okay with that, but there is plenty to come. I have a few shipments that are coming in, so next week we're going to have a lot to discuss, so don't worry about that. But in the meantime, I did want to do a little bit of a custom showcase of Ollie. So we have 3 figures over here. We have one that's kind of just custom done, we have 2 that are totally reworked into completely different characters. So from left to right, we have OWLMAN, CYBORG Superman, and The Question. So I wanted to go over the recipes of how I made them, if you want to make them yourself, and just go over a few little things that I did with them that I just found pretty interesting. So anyhow, let's go ahead and start over here with OWLMAN. So for those of you who have seen my cape tutorial that I did in recent weeks, you could probably assume that I am working on my crime syndicate, and for those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically a rogue team of anti-superheroes who are like an inverse of the Justice League that we see on an alternate Earth, but instead of enforcing justice, they instead enforce crime and corruption. And naturally, OWLMAN is the antithesis of Batman. He's just a really cool character with a really awesome design. McFarlane has released 2 different versions of this character. This is the first one they did. This is the Crime Syndicate variant that came with a piece of Starro. Obviously, I got him loose. I don't plan on building Starro because he can't even stand up for the life of him. And they also released the McFarlane Gold Label Forever Evil version, which is done in a blue deco, which is also pretty cool. But for me, I prefer this one mainly because, as literally everyone is saying, it's very reminiscent of Night Owl from The Watchmen, especially in the cowl over here. So when I got this figure, I had full intent on customizing him. There were just a lot of things I feel like were good enough on their own, but I just knew that they needed a little bit of a customizer's touch. So we're going to talk about that. And also, if you saw the cape tutorial, then you've already seen this guy, but there's still a few little nuances I wanted to cover. So anyhow, let's start over here at the head and torso, I suppose. We'll couple those together. Naturally, everything here is done up in chrome, as opposed to what it was before, which is a really boring slate gray, very matte, very boring. I didn't like it at all. So I had to do it up in chrome. And I've shown these markers off before, but for those of you who have not seen it, I used the Zoet liquid chrome markers, which I got off of Amazon. So if you want to pick up a set, they're really nice to work with. They dry rather quickly, but I'd recommend painting up one component at a time, waiting 24 hours, they can go back in. I've also worked with the Molotow pens, but I found that those take 7 days, but the Zoet liquid chrome pens, they lie on a little bit better, they take a little less long to dry, and they just look nicer overall once they're applied to a figure. So anyhow, anywhere there was gray, except for the belt, I applied some chrome to give him more of a metallic sheen, obviously. I also went ahead and I redid some of the smaller colors as well. So I did some yellow in the eyes and on the logos that we have here on the chest and the belt. And I also totally redid the white as well. I used like paint markers for those as well. I don't have those on hand, so I apologize for that. If you want to know about any materials I use for the figures that I have in this video or other custom showcases, let me know in the description and I'll do my best to provide you with a link or whatever it is you need. Anyhow, going around, here's where things get really fun. I did not love the cape that he came with. It looked good, but I just felt like it was very restricting, as most plastic capes are, very cumbersome, limits articulation, you know that whole gambit by now. So, for those of you who have not seen the cape tutorial, I did something here that is totally unique, as you can see. So, instead of a cape, I almost gave him this mechanical backpack of sorts. And the really fun thing about this is you can extend each individual wing so that you have a total spread here. It takes a little bit of work, but just to be sure they lie up properly. But you can see we could take out each wing, spread them out, and it looks like he can fly. So that's really cool. I really love that. Not comic accurate at all. I just thought it would be a unique little thing to do, and a little different from just a standard plain Jane cape. So I wanted to do that. Basically what I did for this, I'll do my best to explain it. I unfortunately have no screenshots or anything to share with you, but I had like this almost silver blue ribbon, and what I did is I used some double-sided tape, folded the ribbon over the tape with some wire in between. So again, go back to the cape tutorial, we'll have a better idea of what I'm talking about. And then I also spray painted them with chrome, then glued them onto his back. I actually glued them on first and I spray painted them later. I recommend spraying first, so that way you don't hit the figure on accident, but he turned out fine. I covered him up properly, so he didn't have any issues there. So Now, the wings are also in silver, so I just found that really fun, just a wacky little decision to do. Something you could do yourself. You don't need ribbon specifically, but I'm sure you could find other materials in your soft goods bin if you have one that you can use for something like this. But even if you go over here, you can see each individual layer of cloth that I have laid on top of each other and glued down. And to cover that up a little bit, over here I have the backpack, which is actually from, of all things, a Star Wars The Black Series B1 battle droid. So I hit that all up in chrome as well, and I gave it a black wash, glued it right on, and it does a pretty good job hiding all the folds, so looking pretty nice. I'm pretty pleased with it. It's a total creative liberty choice there. Again, not comic accurate, but I don't care. I want my figures to look the way that I want them to, and he looks a lot more bitchin' now, so I got no issues there. Anyhow, moving on down, it's just chrome from here on out, not much else in terms of creative decisions, but we have chrome hands, chrome gauntlets, which I really love. I love the feather design that they have. That's part of the reason why I wanted to go with wings in the back, because I felt like he needed to have a feathered sort of look rather than just a standard cape. That would be pretty boring for OWLMAN here. And then going on down, we have some silver kneecaps, and then calf guards and feet. And those were chromed up in the exact same way as everything else. So that's pretty much it for OWLMAN, just a standard repaint and retool of the cape. Not much else to speak of here, but it was really fun to do. If you have this figure on hand, or you plan on shelling out a little bit of cash to get him because he's a little hard to get, at least this version, then let me know what you do with him. I'm very curious to know. Now, while OWLMAN was a repaint and a slight retool of the cape, he's still good, but these next two are just a lot more exciting for me. So, over here we have CYBORG Superman, who, of course, first appeared in the 90s. McFarlane has done a figure of him, but it was more attuned with a DC Rebirth version of him, which I don't like at all, and good thing, because he sold out, so I don't have to worry about chasing after him. So I decided I'll make my own, more based on his 90s iteration, which is just a lot more interesting to me. I prefer this look a lot more, and he's really fun to build, so let's talk about him. First things first, the really awesome head sculpt. Now, I did not produce this head sculpt. I actually got this as a third-party good along with the Questions head sculpt on eBay, so I will supply a link to that shop as well in the description if you are so inclined to get some of your own. And I painted this completely from scratch. And fortunately, it's not supposed to be a hyper-realistic character, so I was able to get away with not having to paint in much flesh, and then the rest of it could look a little bit cartoony, so I could afford to cut a few corners in terms of painting them up. But basically, I based him out in almost this tan or beige primer slash sealer spray, and then I painted up everything in hand. Like, I used the same chrome markers that we were just talking about over here on the cybernetic side of his face, and then everything over here, the hair and the face and even the eye, I painted in all on my own. So that was really difficult to do, but I'm really pleased with the results. I think it looks pretty sharp and very, very shiny, so digging him a lot. We also have a cape here. This was originally a solid cape. In fact, this whole figure was from the insanely goofy Superman that we saw from the Superman versus Superman of Earth 3-pack slash Ultraman, rather. And obviously, I have a whole bunch of Supermen now. Didn't really want this version at all. So as soon as I got that pack, I figured I'll have two evil Supermen. I'll have Ultraman and I'll have CYBORG Superman. So that's how we got here, obviously. Anyways, back to the cape. I made this totally from scratch. Again, did a tutorial. I'll shut up about the tutorial now, but if you're interested, check it out. But it's bendy, got the wire in there, moves very beautifully, and I like it a lot, so that's very good. Once again, double-sided tape with wire, can't go wrong there. As for the torso, this is where it got really tricky for me, because the CYBORG Superman design inherently is asymmetrical. Like, over here on the torso, there's supposed to be a big gap off to the side, so it looks very Terminator-like. So I pretty much had to paint in everything with silver manually, again, using those markers. Then I went back in with black paint, and I had to imply these lines and shadow over here to sort of base out the abs, the pecs, and everything. And also these riveted designs I kind of used source images to base my decisions off of. So a little bit of comic influence and a little bit of creative nuance as well. As for the arm, the cybernetic arm obviously, and the cybernetic leg, these are actually from the Lex Luthor in his green armored variant. So this arm over here was no issue. I just had to pop out the original arm, then pop this one in and do it up in silver. I sprayed it in silver, and then I kind of corrected it with the markers a little bit because the spray I used was a little sticky for some reason. So I corrected it with marker. It makes it a little bit less dingy, so it's a little bit better off. Another thing worth mentioning is the Lex Luthor came with these really big gauntlets, and I peeled it off so that way you could have the exposed arm over here, which I think looks a lot nicer. And also, when you spray up action figures, here's an important tip. Don't spray up pieces of soft plastic, because I find that spray-on paint won't adhere as well to them. That was just the paint I was using. With other paints, it might get off better, but for this figure, I wanted to avoid that, so I peeled that piece off, and without it, it actually looks better, in my opinion. Although the one side effect here is that you have this big old R for right, for when they were constructing the base figure, but it's not a big deal for me. I might actually create another component to put in there, like a ray gun or something like that, so that might be nice. Another thing I wanted to mention is these are not Lex Luthor's hands, and by these I mean there's an alternate one, I have it over here. These two hands actually came from the Two-Face and Batman disguise figure. I just had those hands extra, and in his righty, I would always have him perpetually holding a gun anyways, so I decided to take the fist and the open and turn them into Cyborg Superman hands. The Lex Luthor hands, they looked really nice, the sculpt was very good, but they were quite small, so I definitely wanted to change them out for something that was still mechanical looking, but proportionally a little bit more well suited to this Superman over here. Down to the belt here, actually, this whole waist and diaper area, this is actually from the Action Comics 1 Superman, who I gave the Rebirth Superman underwear, I believe. I don't know what you call it. I just call it underwear. It just makes the most sense. But the only issue with that is that on the Action Comics 1 Superman, these little bands around the belt were not painted in, so I had to do that myself. You see, I didn't do a perfect job. There's a little bit of paint rub, but it doesn't bug me too much. It's a custom. It's okay if there's a few flaws here and there. And the last thing to talk about is this leg, which is, again, from Lex Luthor. Did the exact same thing. I sprayed it up in silver, did a little bit of marker work as well, and then I kind of panel lined it to make it look a little more comic-y. And the one thing that's worth mentioning here is if I pop out and pan down, you will notice if I straighten out these legs over here, the Lex Luthor leg is a little bit too long. You see, it has a little bit more height on the Superman leg. I did try to correct this. I actually popped the foot out and I drumbled down inside of the calf a little bit to give it a little more room to socket in. It helped a little bit, but not a ton. So, unfortunately, the legs are different heights, so he can't stand perfectly. He will just lean to the side. But for me, I don't mind because he's either going to be crouching a little bit, moving forward, then, oops, see, there goes the foot. So the foot's removable. But I'm going to have him crouching forward a little bit, doing a good action stance. Well, by good, I mean we're just going to do this on the spot and see how it turns out. Something like that. You get the idea. I don't feel like making it perfect. Or I'm going to have him suspended on a flight stand. And when you do that, it's not going to be noticeable. So if you want to use the Superman and Lex Luthor recipe that I'm using, just be aware of this leg. You're going to need to either find a way to shorten it more than I did. I don't know what that would be. Or you could just use forced perspective by posing him in a way so it's not as noticeable. The last thing I might consider doing with this Cyborg Superman is going to the chest logo and painting one half that's on the cybernetic portion a little bit darker on the S, because I noticed that on some iterations of this particular character design is that the S was split in half and one half was a little bit darker, more of a dark crimson than anything. So that's something I might do, might not. I'm pretty happy with him as he is, so that's almost all for him. The one other thing I wanted to mention is I also removed the kneecap for the exact same reason why I removed the gauntlet. It was a softer plastic, it won't take it to chrome as nicely, so pop that off. And honestly, without it, it's not noticeable at all. It just looks like it's part of the design, so I didn't feel the need to sand it or replace it with a different part. He looks fine. So anyhow, that's pretty much it for Cyborg Superman. A ton of fun to build. Another thing worth mentioning is you're going to need some poster tack to keep the head on the ball joint in there, but otherwise moves fine, pretty good. And I had to shave down the neck as well because it was a little bit too thick, but once you get the head on there, it looks pretty awesome. So no complaints from me. The last figure we have to talk about here in this little custom volley is the Question, a pretty niche character, but for the few who know about him, they sincerely love him, and the more I learn about him, the more I love him as well. He's just a really awesome character. Also, the influence for Rorschach from Watchmen, so yeah, we got a little bit of a Watchmen pattern going on with OWLMAN over here as well, so that's pretty interesting. But once more, I got the head sculpt from the same seller as I did from the Cyborg Superman, so again, link in the description. And as for the base figure, this was actually a fodder Jokerized Dark Knight Two-Face, which I thought was perfect, almost perfect. We'll get to that. It had the tie, it's got the jacket, and it's got the legs down here and the dress shoes. It just seemed like the perfect base for it. I spray painted it, and I expected it to be just like a matte blue, but it wound up being shiny, so that was pretty interesting, but I actually don't mind that at all. It looks a little bit better, if you were to ask me, because part of his lore is that he almost has this yellow gas or something that alters the color of his clothing, so I don't know, that could be a side effect of it, but it looks nice, so I'm not bothered by it whatsoever. I kind of would wish I used a paint like this on Mr. Freeze's face from Batman and Robin, but I don't know, it's just pretty cool. And then also, as for the jacket and the hands, those are from the collector's edition Captain Boomerang. So if you want to go out of your way to surrender the jacket from Captain Boomerang, which a lot of people are, and then use it on a custom Question, then I think it's a perfect match. They look great together. Now, there were some issues when I was making this figure, some compromises that I needed to make. The first thing is that, you've probably noticed this already, is that on the base Dark Knight Two-Face body, there is this scorch going down the jacket, which is, of course, accurate to the film, but it's not really accurate to the Question, so I decided to just roll with it. I'll make that part of the character. Maybe he was running around, he got burned or something, so I actually just painted that in with a little bit of light gray and dark gray, give it a bit of a cinch look, so I'm not bothered by that at all, and also the trench coat covers it a little bit, so not a huge deal, and when you do see it, it just adds a little bit more story, so totally fine by me. Now, the second thing that you definitely want to consider if you're using the Two-Face as a base body for the Question is that, at least on my copy, the hands were totally frozen. And that's because everything was heavily painted. The hands were heavily painted, the joints were heavily painted, so everything was totally frozen. So when I went to pop the hands off, the entire joint broke. So what I had to do is actually go in there and Dremel a new hole in, which is really difficult to do because it's a very tough plastic. And then I had to use some alternate joints I had in my fodder bin. So I actually used joints from the Hush Superman, plugged those in, actually reversed them, and that's what made them compatible with the Captain Boomerang hands over here. So I could pop one out, and you'll see it actually comes out with the joint itself. So if you wanted to remove these from each other, which is a little tricky, this end of the joint, the thicker part, was going inside the wrist of the Hush Superman. But over here, it's interesting because this is directly compatible with the hands of Boomerang. So you can pop that inside. And then when I drilled in the holes, I went a little bit off center because, again, the original pin is kind of still in there, but just got to wiggle it around, and then you can find the original hole, the new hole in there, excuse me. So yeah, he's got some pretty nice hands here, so you can have him doing a little bit of that Zen martial arts thing going on, which I really like, which is excellent, and naturally he's compatible with all the Captain Boomerang hands. So also got some fists over here, which I don't feel like interchanging right now, so you can have him doing some punching and whatever, but yeah, just a really great looking figure. A lot of materials and paints went into him, so if you're curious about what they were, let me know in the comments, and then I will provide you with a link or a name, if possible, depending on what I got left. I just run through these paints really quickly sometimes, so I forgot what they're called, what the brand is, and all that, but if you really need to know, then I'll dig through and I'll see what I got for you. And I didn't really talk about the head sculpt as much. I feel like I should, but it's really awesomely done. I believe this one and the Cyborg Superman head were both 3D printed, but you're not noticing any of the 3D printed layers in there or anything. They're very smooth. They're contoured really nicely, and same as the Superman head over there, I sprayed it in a base primer and sealer, then I painted everything with acrylics. So notes here on the hat. It's not quite perfect, but it's enough for me. I mean, again, he's a guy who's running around solving mysteries and stuff, so it's okay if the hat it looks a little bit battered and tattered, so not an issue. Also got the hair back here. Gave it a darker brown, so I thought that looked pretty nice. And then I did my best with the flesh tone and translated it down here onto the neck, which is also pretty important. There was also some scorched texture work on the neck as well, but I kind of just ignored that. You could do something with that if you want to, but for me it's not the most noticeable thing, especially when the head casts some shadow against the neck itself. I actually really love how the hat casts shadow down to the nose. I think that's really neat looking silhouette going on, or whatever you want to call it, so really nice. One of my favorite customs I've ever done, easily, although not without its challenges, but he looks really badass, so no complaints here. I think he is really fun. I think he was really fun to make, and if you want to go out and do him yourself, let me know what your recipe was. I'm really curious. And that's about all for these 3 various customs. Again, we had OWLMAN over here, who was really just a repaint, and then I did a totally unique thing with the cape. As for CYBORG Superman, a little bit of kit bashing and a third-party goods up here at the head, so that was really awesome to do. Then just had to repaint everything and leave half of it unpainted, so that was a really interesting experience. Also, custom cape to boot, can never go wrong with that. And then lastly, for the question, he had a lot of mechanical problems in the hands. Once I got everything moving, and I plugged everything off, painted it, plugged everything back together again, he came out to be a pretty cohesive figure. I think he works. I don't know if they're ever going to release an official version of the question from McFarlane, but something tells me that I'm going to like my personal version better, just based off of personal connection. But regardless, I'm really digging this question, and all the figures here. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this little custom showcase. If you've made the same characters of your own and your custom collection, then let me know what you did, what the formula was and everything, what paints you used, so on, so I can be informed, and others as well. And if you enjoyed this little showcase, then please, as per usual, be sure to
Like, comment,
ring the bell to be notified of our latest arrivals, and subscribe.
This is the editor speaking, humbly reminding you to support the pod Patreon in the description to guarantee new content every single week.
Thank you guys very much for watching. Rock on, and I will see you all later.